Now, the last video we made on the channel where we spoke about Casey Mittelstadt, who is going to be the topic of today's video, it was less about Mittelstadt himself and more about a rivalry that the media presented between Casey Mittelstadt and Elias Pettersson. That video made a few months ago, I think. Pretty sure it was a few months ago. Again, quarantine, my whole sense of time has been distorted. March feels like a week ago, but it's already the middle of July. But that video was mostly about the proposed rivalry and the Calder race that many people were bringing up between Elias Pettersson and Casey Mittelstadt before the 2018-2019 season. Back then, Mittelstadt was seen by many as the #1 NHL prospect affiliated with a team, and some may say that it was unjustified at the time, but the way things have gone today, where Casey Mittelstadt is an AHL player and Elias Pettersson is a Vancouver Canucks star, you can kind of see people who were right and wrong about that certain rivalry all the way back 2 years ago. But now, we're talking about Casey Mittelstadt because I have some concerns as to how his development has gone on. And if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan watching this video, you heard me say that sentence and you just groaned. Because this has been a thing that, upon further research, apparently has been super prevalent among Buffalo Sabres fans, media, and discussion. So let's get into the profile for Casey Mittelstadt and start to talk about what's been going on with this player as of late. Casey Mittelstadt was a 2017 NHL drafted prospect, selected 8th overall by the Buffalo Sabres. He's currently listed as 6'1", 203 pounds as a center. He also plays the left wing sometimes in Buffalo as well, so we'll consider that too. He was born November 22nd, 1998, meaning that he was one of the older players in his draft year. In that draft year, he played for the Eden Prairie High School hockey team, which is a team for the Minnesota High School Hockey League, where he was a very valuable captain, getting 64 points in 25 games. Unfortunately, though, high school hockey only lasts in the winter, and the Eden Prairie High School hockey team didn't end up winning in the playoffs, so Casey Mittelstadt finished off his draft year with the Green Bay Gamblers in the USHL, getting 30 points in 24 games. Mittelstadt was noted as a quick and shifty, skilled, Patrick Kane-like forward, a guy who could deke the pants off of you with an extremely determinable work ethic and an overall dynamic package that allows him to be one of the best forwards point production-wise on the ice every time he steps out there. So he was supposed to go pretty high in the draft because of this really nice performance highlighted by USHL play and high school play. He was ranked 7th by ISS, 5th by Future Considerations, 8th by Hockey Prospect, 5th by McKean, 6th by TSN and Bob McKenzie, and 3rd for North American Skaters by NHL Central Scouting. For a guy who played half of the year in the high school leagues, this just doesn't happen. You don't see players who are this highly touted coming out of Minnesota high school hockey. So when the Buffalo Sabres selected him 8th overall, it wasn't really a surprise, and in fact, people were touting him as a potential #1 center down the line. Now let's bounce around a little bit. Let's go a full year later at the end of his draft +1, because at the end of his draft +1, he finished up a year with the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers hockey team in the NCAA. He had 30 points in 34 games, which on the surface is good, don't get me wrong. It's just the comparisons with other players in that league statistically were not all too great. For example, Brady Tkachuk, a guy who was going to be drafted the next season, ended up having more points than Mittelstadt did. Quinn Hughes, a guy who was supposed to be drafted later and who was a D-man, had a similar points per game as Casey Mittelstadt did. Ryan Poehling, a guy taken by the Habs at the end of that 2017 first round, had more points than Mittelstadt too. Now, to be fair, the Golden Gophers weren't all too great that season. They were 5th out of the 7 teams in the Big Ten Conference, so it's understandable to an extent as to why Casey Mittelstadt's production wasn't the best, but his draft stock at this point in time was through the roof. Because not only did he make his NHL debut at the end of that season getting 5 points in 6 games played with the Buffalo Sabres, but his World Juniors was so dominantly amazing that expectations for Casey Mittelstadt going into the next season were just through the roof. 11 points in 7 games played for Team USA. Now that may not seem like a super high number, like okay, he had over a point per game, that's awesome, but we've seen guys before who have had way more points than that, and yes, that's true, but the fact is, Casey Mittelstadt and the way he played the game was just so suited for U20 competition, internationally speaking. It's not super physical, and you don't need to be a big guy to excel in this environment, meaning that guys like Casey Mittelstadt, who relied on speed, skill, puck handling abilities, and their offensive instincts, these guys shined, and as a result, Casey Mittelstadt walked away with an All-Star Team nomination, the Best Forward Award, a bronze medal, the most points in the tournament, the MVP of the tournament, and a top 3 player on the Team USA squad in general. He was just so good, and because Elias Pettersson wasn't that good at the World Juniors that year, it kind of put Mittelstadt on top of Pettersson in a lot of people's minds in regards to who would be the better forward long-term. So, heading into his first season with the Sabres in 2018-2019, the Calder race, as many people would dub it, between Pettersson and Mittelstadt finished up with 25 points in 77 games. Now, that is not terrible, certainly not bad. It's a very solid production line from a player who definitely deserves to be in the NHL, but it's not what people were expecting. Sure, Mittelstadt was 20 for the majority of the year, which meant he had a lot of time to grow still. But after that season, people were kind of questioning as to where the direction lies. The next season's worth of play saw Mittelstadt get 31 games played for the Sabres and 9 points. He had 25 games in the 36 games he spent in the Rochester Americans system, but that's just it. At this point in time, you can look at a few articles over here and see that some other players from around that time in the draft have somewhat passed Mittelstadt in terms of their upwards development. This is a graph from expectedbuffalo.com, taking a look at the PNHLE scores of different NHL prospects from that range in the draft. Nick Suzuki, Martin Necas, Owen Tippett, Elias Anderson, for crying out loud, and Gabe Vilardi have all passed Casey Mittelstadt in terms of their projected NHL equivalency scores by this time in their draft plus 3 years. PNHLE is a score that takes a look at a player's point production, their position, their age, and all these other factors, and it combines them to give them a score that projects as to how good they're going to be in the future. Mittelstadt's score is now lower than a lot of these guys, and all these guys except for Glass and Anderson were taken after Mittelstadt at the draft, might I remind you. This article here on expectedbuffalo.com highlights how all these other players have seen upward trajectory over the past few years, but Mittelstadt's PNHLE score has mostly remained flat, suggesting the idea that the player that we have today with Casey Mittelstadt could realistically be the same player we have in Mittelstadt 3 or 4 years from now. Certainly, it's not guaranteed to work out that way, but other metrics on this article also go over Mittelstadt's poor play in his own zone and his not really super strong contribution on offense via these isolated impact charts. Now, you could definitely say that these impacts have been changed from year 1 to year 2 in the NHL because of his line mates, and that is a fair argument to make. In 2018-19, Casey Mittelstadt played with guys like Connor Sherry, he played with Sam Reinhart sometimes, he played with Jason Pominville and Jeff Skinner at times too, but this most recent season saw Casey Mittelstadt playing more with guys like Jimmy Vesey and Evan Rodriguez, and sure, he had some time with Sherry and Skinner, but that was short-lived, and eventually he got moved over with Asplund and Olofsson. He got sent down to the AHL afterwards and hasn't looked back. So for Casey Mittelstadt, to me, his upwards development path has been so weird, and it's always been in this weird spot where he was overhyped in 2017-18, and now he is well under a point per game at the AHL level. So there's certainly a lot to be desired here going forward with Mittelstadt, and the fact that he is an RFA is going to leave the Sabres with some very big decision-making in the next few months. But to me, Casey Mittelstadt still is a guy who does boast some legitimate top 6 potential. It's just the path to getting there, in my opinion, seems to be a lot more difficult today than it seemed 2 years ago. So, talk to me in the comments what you think is going on with Casey Mittelstadt. Do you still think a potential elite player lies in this frame, or are you on the more pessimistic side of things? Let me know in the comments below what you think. Also, talk to me about the other guys in the 2017 draft who have seemed to overtaken Mittelstadt development-wise, as they are already good NHL players like Suzuki, for example, but Mittelstadt is still down there in the AHL. Am I being too harsh on that, or do we just need to give it time? I hope you enjoyed this video. So that's 99, and bye.